Hello, second grade Smarties, and welcome to Wit and Wisdom Module 3, Civil Rights Heroes, lesson number 6. Today, our pizza bite question, the question that we are trying to answer today is, how does Martin Luther King Jr. and the March on Washington build my knowledge of the injustices happening in America in the 1960s? So we are going to listen to the Freedom Singers sing Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Round Again. As you are listening to this, I want you to start thinking, how does this song connect with our text? What is similar between this song and Martin Luther King Jr. and the March on Washington?
In 1960. Let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. I know you can never tell when you might need it. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom land. Ain't gonna let no injunction turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let no injunction turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom land. Ain't gonna let no jailhouse turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let no jailhouse turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, yeah, keep on talking, yeah, marching up the freedom land. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, yeah, keep on talking, marching up to freedom yeah.
All right, Smarties. So I want you to think, how does this song connect with what we learned about in the book? Tell me in the puzzle. So this book connects to what we read about because this is a song that was used during marches, during protests. And remember, we learned that people in the 1960s, they started marching and peacefully protesting against segregation, against the injustice of separating people based on the color of their skin. So yesterday we talked about the injustices that people faced, and we talked about what we could keep in our hearts and our minds from this text and from that song. We talked about how we need to fight for what is right. We need to fight against injustices, and we need to keep going. Just like the song said, keep on marching, keep on walking, keep on talking. What is one word or short phrase that tells you something important you've learned about what was life like during the time of the March on Washington? What is a key word that you have learned from this text? What is a word that we learned about that relates to what was happening during the civil rights movement? So think about the words that we've learned. We've talked about marches. We've talked about that word that means separated. We've talked about a word that means people being treated unfairly. What is a vocabulary word you have learned since learning about Martin Luther King Jr. and the March on Washington? Tell me in the puzzle. So a few words that we have talked about in relation to this topic of the civil rights movement. We've talked about marches. We've talked about protesting. We've talked about refusing to give up. Other key words we've talked about is segregation, Jim Crow laws, that act of separating Black and white people based on the color of their skin. We've also talked about injustices. Injustices are actions that are unfair to people that deserve the same rights and opportunities as other people. And we've talked about the injustices of segregation. Segregation is something that people were fighting against during the civil rights movement. Another word we've talked about is integration, bringing people together with different colors of skin. So as we are wrapping up our time with this text, Martin Luther King Jr. and the March on Washington, I want you to think about how people responded to these injustices. How did people respond, and what was the impact of that response? So remember, responding is a way someone acts when something happens. So people were responding, they were acting out against segregation. And the impact is what happens when one event changes another. What happened after people protested and marched? So we know in the text that this book talked a lot about Martin Luther King Jr. and how he responded to the injustices of the world, in his world. I want you to listen to this page in the text, and I want you to tell me in the Ed puzzle, after I read this text, how did Martin Luther King Jr. respond to injustices? Dr. King is a man of peace, but he is also a fighter. He doesn't use his fists or weapons. He uses his words. In the South, Dr. King has led many protests. One was a march in Georgia. Another was a protest against a bus company in Alabama. He has been in jail many times. How did Dr. King respond to injustices? Tell me in the puzzle. The text tells us that he uses his words. He doesn't use his fists or weapons, and he leads protests and marches against segregation. We also know that because he led those protests, he was in jail many times. We also know that he gave his famous speech at the March on Washington, his I Have a Dream speech, which impacted America in 1963. What impact did Martin Luther King Jr. have on the country? A year after he gave his I Have a Dream speech, what happened in America? Listen to this page in the text and then tell me in the Ed puzzle, what impact did Martin Luther King Jr. have? 1 year later, a law is passed. It is called the Civil Rights Act of 1964. From now on, there cannot be restaurants for whites only. There cannot be separate seating for Black people and white people in any public place. People cannot be kept apart just because of the color of their skin. So what happened because Martin Luther King Jr. kept on going, kept on speaking against injustices? What happened in America? Tell me in the puzzle. So a year after the March on Washington, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. So that Civil Rights Act brought integration into the country. People could not be separated or kept out of places because of the color of their skin. So when we're thinking about responses to injustices, we also need to think about their impact. So the actions that people took to fight against injustices, how did that help America later? So Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech called I Have a Dream. That is how he responded to injustice. His impact was that the country passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and his speech inspired people to keep fighting for equal rights. Why do you think it's important that we know the impact of Martin Luther King Jr.'s actions? Why is that important to us? Why is it important that he gave a speech? Tell me in the puzzle. His speech was important and his impact was important because it affects our lives today. It affects people in their rights to equality. It changed America. There are still things that are happening with injustices in this world, in America, but his response impacted people's lives a year after his speech. So I want you to think, what is some important knowledge that you gained? What is something that is going to stick in your brain after studying this text? What is something that you have learned after reading this text? Tell me in the puzzle. So something that we can learn from this text is that Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech during the March on Washington that gave people hope for a better world. We also learned that people can respond to injustice in different ways. People can use their words. People can march. People can protest peacefully. They can do sit-ins. And we also learned that the March on Washington was a protest against segregation. It led to laws being changed. What is something that we learned how to do as a writer? What did we learn how to use in our writing? Tell me in the puzzle. So we learned that we could collect information from more than one source. When we did our evidence organizer, we collected evidence from the book that we've been reading, as well as a video. We also used photos to help us understand and learn more about how people responded to the injustice of segregation. All right, Smarties. So I want you to think about this song. Oh, ain't nobody gonna turn me around. So I want you to think about this song. We know that this song was very repetitive. It starts by talking about not gonna let anybody turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. The next part of the song said, ain't gonna let segregation turn me around. And the final section talked about ain't gonna let Jim Crow turn me around. What did Jim Crow laws do? We've talked about Jim Crow a little bit, but what did those Jim Crow laws force people to do? They forced segregation, right? Jim Crow laws were all about segregation. And the person that enforced those laws was Bull Connor. He was a person that forced people to follow those Jim Crow laws. So I want you to think, why do all of these words belong in this song? Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Ain't gonna let segregation turn me around. Ain't gonna let Jim Crow turn me around. Why do all of those words belong together? What impact do those words have for other people? Tell me in the puzzle. All of those words connect because it was a song for protesting. It was a song to let people know that they were not going to let people, segregation, or unfair laws change their minds about fighting for what is right. So I want you to think, how would we use this song today? Are there songs that we can use to let people know that we can stand up for what we believe in? What are start thinking, what are some songs that you know that encourage you to keep on going? All right, Smarties. So here is what we are going to do now. You are going to need a piece of paper and your evidence organizer because we are going to do our writing task right now. So our writing task, we are wanting to answer the question, what were the injustices people faced before the Civil Rights Act? Now, for our writing task, we need to have an introduction. We need to have a topic statement. We need to have one sentence that was evidence from the book. So we're going to say book evidence. Video evidence. This is where your evidence organizer is going to come in handy. And we need a conclusion. So the question we are trying to answer is, how did people respond to the injustices before the Civil Rights Act? So I want you to think about your introduction sentence. Remember, your introduction sentence kind of gives you a meaning of the question. So that question was asking about injustices. So our introduction sentence is maybe going to give us the meaning of injustice. So we could say an injustice is blank. So your introduction, you are telling your reader what injustice is. What is an injustice? Now, our writing task is about the injustices that people faced before the Civil Rights Act. So what do you think your topic statement is going to be about? It's going to be about people and how they faced injustice. What injustices did they face? So you could say, many people faced blank before blank. So many people faced injustice before the Civil Rights Act. Okay, so there's our introduction and our topic statement. You need to complete those sentences, Smarties. So you need to give me your introduction. Tell me what an injustice is. Your topic statement is going to tell your reader what they are going to learn about. They're going to learn about the injustices that people faced before the Civil Rights Act. So now is where you give your evidence from your sources. So in your evidence organizer, look at the evidence you collected from the book. You are going to write one complete sentence about one of the injustices that people faced from the book. So you can say, Black people blank. You are going to complete that sentence. What is an injustice that you learned about in the book? Now, the video evidence. Look at the 3 pieces of evidence you collected from the video. You can say they blank. You're going to give me another injustice that people faced that you learned from the video. Now, your conclusion. What is your conclusion going to be similar to, Smarties? It's going to be similar to your topic statement. So this is where it's up to you. You need to give me a conclusion. Remember, it can be similar to your topic statement. So as you finish up your writing, okay? As you are finishing up your writing, I want you to go through a checklist in your mind about your writing. Did you understand the injustices that people faced? Yes or no? Did you start the paragraph with an introduction? Did you include a topic statement? And did you include 2 points of evidence? Did you finish your paragraph with a conclusion? So in total, Smarties, you should have an introduction sentence, a topic statement, 2 pieces of evidence, and a conclusion. You should have 5 sentences. Did you use complete sentences? Did your sentences make sense? And did you use topic specific words? So be thinking about this checklist. Did you do all of those things in your writing? If you are one of my smarties, do not forget to send a picture of your finished writing to me in Seesaw. All right, and we are going to wrap up our lesson with a deep dive. So today we are going to be talking about the word relationships between the words ask, tell, command, demand, request, order, and force. So I'm going to show you a picture, and I am hovering around it right now. I want you to think, how would the sign "We demand voting rights now"? How would that sign be different if it said, "We ask for voting rights now"? How is that different? We demand voting rights now, or we ask for voting rights now. How would that be different if I ask for something or if I demand something? What is different about those two words? What do you think? Tell me what you're thinking in the Ebb puzzle. What is different between asking for something or demanding something? So when you ask for something, when you ask a person, they can say yes or no to your request. They can say yes or no when you ask. But when you demand for something, you are not taking a yes or no answer. You are expecting something to happen. So we have talked about shades of meaning, words that have stronger meanings, but might have a similar definition. They might have a similar meaning, but some of the meanings might be stronger or weaker than others. So, for example, order, if I order you to do something, that means I command that someone do something. If I command, that means to give an order in a forceful way. If I demand something, that means I am asking something powerfully. So the people protesting, they were powerfully asking for something to happen. They were not going to take a yes or no answer. If you force someone to do something, that means you make someone do something against their will. So the Jim Crow laws, segregation was forced on people. People did not have an option. It was against their will. And if I request for something, that means I politely ask for something. So think about the civil rights movement. What would it have been like if people just requested or asked nicely for things to happen? Would it have gotten done? Would the civil rights movement have been successful? No, people had to be strong. So I want you to think, did Martin Luther King ask or force people to march with him? Think about those words. Force means to make someone do something against their will. Did Martin Luther King Jr. ever force anybody to do anything? No. Remember, he used his words, but people wanted to protest. How about this sentence? Did the Civil Rights Act request or order that segregation end? Did the Civil Rights Act request? Did they ask politely? Or did they command for segregation to end? Tell me in the Ebb puzzle. The Civil Rights Act ordered that segregation ended, right? There wasn't an option. It was a command. It was something that people had to do. And I want you to think, is telling someone to do something stronger or weaker than asking them to do something? If I tell you to go take out the trash, is that stronger or weaker than asking you, will you please go take out the trash? Telling you, say, go take out the trash, is that stronger or weaker than say, will you please go take out the trash? What do you think? Telling someone to do something usually has a stronger meaning than asking. Because if I ask you, will you do this? You could say, no, I don't think so. But when you tell someone to do something, that means that you are demanding or commanding or ordering someone to do something. So let's put these words in order. So let's see, which word do we think has the strongest meaning? What has the strongest meaning? Order, request, demand, or force? Which word do you think has the strongest meaning? Tell me in the puzzle. So the word that has the strongest meaning is the word force. If I force you to do something, you do not get an option. You do not get a choice. Which word has the weakest meaning? Which one is not as strong as the other words? Order, request, demand, or command? In the puzzle, tell me which word has the weakest meaning. So the word that has the weakest meaning is request. Remember, request means you ask politely to do something. And so let's put these last three words in order. If I order you to do something, is that going to be closer to force or to request? It's going to be closer to force, right? If I order you to do something, that means that you do not have a choice, that you need to do what I ask you to do. And what about demand and command? If I command you to do something, that means I demand that you do something right now. So do you think command or demand is closer to order? I would say command is closer to ordering, and then demand is closer to request, because demand is asking for something in a forceful way. All right, Smarties, that was kind of a long lesson, but you guys are building your knowledge on these civil rights heroes and how they respond to injustice. Remember to keep that growth mindset, Smarties. Good learners do hard things, and I will see you very soon with a new lesson. Happy learning, Smarties.